I always tell my friends and colleagues, life is always interesting, and it's got moments that are very exciting, and I call those moments the spice to life. Otherwise, your life will be very boring, So we had one such spice to life moment, which was very exciting, and now we move on. So apologies for the late delay. Can I now call on Harrison to come up and to call his team? Sure. Please come on up. I hand over to you. It's the drone regulations in Africa, and they're going to be talking about what happened later on.
Absolutely.
Fine. You're welcome. A big hand for him.
Hello. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be up here. I had the privilege of being at the Lake Victoria Challenge about a year and a half ago, and seeing where we've been, and where we're going is truly inspiring. Before I begin and I bring up the panelists, just want to say a quick thank you. We're very grateful on behalf of the World Economic Forum to be here, to be able to bring together regulators from across the world.
Okay.
But I really wanted to thank the World Bank team that I work with the most closely.
I want to give you.
George, maybe you could close your mic. Thanks. That team would be Edward's team, including Rosa, Paulina, Catalina, and Gregor. Without you, none of this would have happened, so thank you very much. They definitely deserve a round of applause. I'd also like to thank the team that I've been able to lead with support from the World Bank, including my colleague Courtney, those working on the projects and documents that I'll refer to in a second, Fane Greenwood and Joelle Maynor and Kenneth Muhangi. And it's Kenneth's birthday today, so maybe just a round of applause for Kenneth. All right, thank you very much. No other industry in the world, I think, calls for regulation more than the unmanned aircraft system community, whether it's drones or RPAS. I think there's a hunger from both industry and regulators to find a safe, harmonized, and secure pathway forward so we can all work together in a productive way. We're honored to have the International Civil Aviation Organization here in force with J.C. Shine and Leslie Carey, who participated in the regulatory panel yesterday in the regulatory discussions, introducing their Model UAS regulation, which they're looking for comments and feedback. So you can visit their website and review that. And it's a huge opportunity for you to be able to directly influence some of the policy that will affect you most greatly. And of course, we have Stephen Kramer, who I'll introduce in a second from ICAO as well. But what we've learned throughout the week is that there is this call for harmonization in a very productive way. And I think this panel that we're about to have, those comments will be reinforced, whether it's regulation, whether it's manufacturing or maintenance. We all have to come together as an industry in a multi-stakeholder way to create that safe, reliable, and inclusive pathway forward. At the World Economic Forum, we believe that prescriptive regulations were necessary in the beginning to really create a safe world where we can learn and innovate, but now we're moving towards a more performance-based regulation or performance-based approach that is standards-driven and really open to innovation so we don't stymie innovation. So now at this point, I'd like to introduce the panel to come up. First, we'll have Steve Kramer from the International Civil Aviation Organization. He's the director of the Air Navigation Bureau, which it's fantastic to have him on this panel. So please. I'd also like to welcome up Emile Arao from the Civil Aviation Safety and Security Oversight Agency, CASSOA. Thank you very much. Next up is Francine Zimmerman from the Swiss Federal Office of Civil Aviation, and she's the manager of the innovation group there, and she'll provide some really interesting thoughts on how Switzerland is thinking about drone regulation. And then finally, next up would be Jörg Dietrich from DLR, the German Aerospace Center, who will talk a little bit about what he's been working on and helping regulations be implemented at a very specific level. And then finally, Andrew Mutabaruka from the Rwandan Civil Aviation Authority. And so please come up, Andrew. And before I move on and we introduce the final discussion, I would also be remiss if I didn't thank the Rwandan Civil Aviation Organization and the Rwandan government for being our esteemed hosts. Thank you to DG Silas and to Isabel there in the corner. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here today and to be hosted by you. So now I will turn it over to our first speaker, Steve Kramer, to give some thoughts on where he sees ICAO's role in the future of unmanned systems. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'll just echo Harrison's point and say thank you to the organizers, World Bank, our partners at the World Economic Forum, Rwanda CAA, the entire government of Rwanda, all of our hosts. It's really a fantastic experience to be here and to be part of a conversation where we're not just talking about African drone regulations, we're frankly talking about the world's drone regulations because you're on the bleeding edge here. You're doing some really cool stuff. So I thought it would be a good scene setter to just talk briefly about why regulate? What's the purpose? And I'll be a little provocative and say that in the aviation industry, we love regulation. We generate regulations by the bookful. At ICAO, we generate 500 provisions a year that go into the Chicago Convention annexes that prescribe how states need to regulate aviation activity. And states tell us, wow, that's pretty hard to keep up with. But the results speak for themselves because aviation, getting on a commercial air transport aircraft is frankly one of the safest places you can be in the entire world. And that's extraordinary. We measured the number of fatalities in aviation worldwide in the hundreds, generally, on an annual basis. And we had a spectacular year, almost 3 years ago, 2017, 49 people was all we lost in commercial air transport out of 4.1 billion people carried on aircraft. Think about that number for a minute, 49. People on roads, not so good. The World Health Organization says 1.3 million people a year are killed related to an accident on a road, either in a vehicle or by a vehicle. So regulation in aviation has been extraordinarily successful. And that's a double-edged sword because that means we like what we do and we think it's really important. And I'll talk about why maybe that's a little more than it needs to be, but it's the starting point that you have to face if you're a new entrant coming into the aviation arena. So the kinds of regulations that we provide are essentially three kinds. There are prescriptive regulations. So a prescriptive regulation is if you're driving a car, you may not exceed the speed limit. The speed limit is posted. If you violate that, we'll give you a ticket. Pretty simple, right? Then we have what we call performance-based regulations. Now, a performance-based regulation says as long as you don't exceed a tolerance, we really don't care how you do it. So stay between the lines on the road. How do you do that? And what's the tolerance for staying between the lines? How far from the line do you need to be? Well, that's not something most of us would have an idea about. We know we need to stay in our lane, but exactly where in our lane isn't really clear because we don't get a ticket for that very often unless we're drifting and weaving. And then it's at the discretion of the police officer. So that's performance-based, and it's really in the eye of the beholder to some degree. In aviation, we don't go that far, though. We say that performance-based means you have to deliver the performance that's outlined. We don't care how you do it, but we do know what that performance measure is. And so we can tell whether you've met that requirement. And the last is competency-based instructions. So while we might have a prescriptive requirement that you have to be a minimum of 16 years old to fly an airplane, a performance-based requirement says you don't have to have a minimum of 200 hours to fly an airplane. You need to perform a certain number of characteristics the same way, repeatably. So that's basics of regulation, and we'll talk a lot more as we go through this conversation about how that works. Now this next slide is about a new concept in aviation, relatively new. It's a 100-year history in aviation, and over the last 20 years, we have introduced what we call safety management. And safety management is the process of essentially proactively correcting for risk. So while I'm talking about safety management, I'm not actually talking about managing safety, I'm talking about managing risk. And risk comes from all sorts of different places. The reason we're so successful in aviation today is we have an enormous catalog of risks, and we know where those risks are, and we know how to manage them. And that management process is essentially known throughout the world in commercial aviation, in standard aviation. And so regulators in all of the countries, like Rwanda and any other country in Africa, they know how to look and see if you're effectively managing risk in your activity. And we manage those risks essentially around the operation. We can do that by looking at the kind of operation, the kind of airspace, the kind of airplane, how much experience is required, and something we don't talk about a lot in drone activity when we have a forum like this, but we also talk about the weather, because the weather is a big determinant of how much we can tolerate. So I'll talk more about that in the future, but one of the things that we look at when we're talking about managing risk is, have you done it correctly? Have you assessed your risk correctly and identified it? And then have you taken the correct path to mitigating that risk? And the reason that's important is we will have accidents. We're going to have fatalities associated with unmanned aircraft operations. I guarantee it. So if you're going to have those accidents, the safety regulator and certainly the operator want to be in a position where they can say they had taken all reasonable precautions to prevent that accident. They had done what was considered the accepted best practice in the industry. Because if they aren't able to say that, then they're open to financial and perhaps criminal liability. And that's something that nobody wants to have. So ultimately, that's why you're interested in regulation, because you want to know how to stay out of jail and how to make money with this activity. So we're going to talk a lot about harmonization as we get into the panel. Harmonization is really the last piece of how to make money, because you can figure out what Rwanda needs to put Zipline in action and deliver life-saving pharmaceuticals and blood in this country and be highly successful. Take it next door and watch how you have to repeat the entire proving process unless there's harmonization of the method that's used by the Civil Aviation Authority in that other country with what you experienced in Rwanda. And that's where ICAO comes in. ICAO's activities under the Chicago Convention are designed to assist states in harmonizing their methodology of approving your operation. And we'll talk about that more as we go. And essentially, that's all about how to share information and how to rapidly prototype in a way that's different from what we've done in aviation in the past. We have an opportunity in the aviation world that the drone manufacturer, the drone proponent brings to us, and that is the ability to innovate and iterate very quickly. We want to fuse that mindset with the safety approach that exists today in safety management in aviation in a way that gives us the best of both worlds. Risk tolerance to an acceptable level that promotes the innovation, but that also puts all the best practices of 100 years of aviation safety experience to work making that possible. Thank you.
Next, I'd like Emile to come up. Or you can, yeah.
Thank you, Harrison. Before they put up the presentation, one thing that I've not had during this whole event is most people know that aviation, number of aircraft ordered in the next 20 years are going to more than double. The figure a few months ago was about 44,400. Now, in addition to that, you're going to add the possibility of drones into the airspace. So you see the airspace is already cluttered and very busy. So it has to be done smart. But as man has shown historically, anytime a challenge is put before you, we're able to innovate and come up with a solution. So at CASSOA, we like challenges. We believe nothing is too difficult to come up with a solution. So before I go into the presentation, I know most of you don't know who CASSOA is or what CASSOA does, where CASSOA is. But teamwork is very important. So before I begin, I'd like to recognize the presence of my colleagues from the CASSOA Secretariat. Kindly just stand up real quick. They're there before you. Okay, and now to the presentation. I'll give you a few slides, and I'm going to breeze through to save time so we deal more on the question and answer session. Learn more about CASSOA. So, the presentation, first section, introduction, establishment of CASSOA, remote piloted aircraft systems, and finally, the conclusion. So, at the EAC, CASSOA is there we recognize the importance of the aviation sector. You can just read right through. And our objective is to harmonize regulations and ensure the safety and security of the aviation industry in our partner states. So CASSOA has been at the forefront in harmonizing civil aviation regulations and procedures in the entire East African community since 2007, after it was set up by the EAC Council of Ministers. So our mandate at CASSOA is to assist the partner states in their undertaking to make air transport services safe, and our mandate is derived from Article 92 of the East African Community Treaty. Our principal agency objectives: promote safe, secure, and efficient use of civil aviation, provide partner states with an appropriate forum for discussing matters in civil aviation, and assist partner states in meeting their safety and security oversight obligations under the Chicago Convention and the ICAO annexes. Our functions: harmonizing operating regulations, developing standardized procedures, and providing guidance and assistance to partner states, including putting in place measures for resource sharing, particularly for the technical personnel. Membership: to be a member of CASSOA is determined by being a party to the EAC Treaty and acceding to the protocol. Our current members are the Republic of Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, Kenya, South Sudan, and the United Republic of Tanzania. Now, working together in CASSOA, working together with all the partner states and all our partners, I have to give a heads up to the Regional Director of ICAO ISAF, because we collaborate and work very efficiently together. I'm not going to go into all the details, but there's a lot more than this. We've been able to set history in the world. In terms of security, last year, 3 of our partner states got presidential awards for marked improvement in security standards, the effective implementation. And one of our partner states, by working together, were able to set history, and this I have to mention, went from being the lowest in the world to going way above the global average. It's never happened in the history of the world before, but it was by working together, building our synergies, respecting each other, and moving forward. As I said, no challenge is too big for CASSOA. Now, we've had, especially this morning and all through the symposium, we've heard a lot about drones and the benefits. And yeah, they're very, very important. However, if you look at the forecast for drones in Africa, the forecast is to go from about 0.4 billion to about 0.9 billion. That graph in front of you is very, very clear. So it's a huge economy, and there's a huge potential for our citizens. But we are not maximizing it based on the forecast. And this is something that at CASSOA and working with all our partners, we're eager to change, because we really need to maximize the utilization of drones, benefit the industries and the economies, and also develop our citizens, but do it safely, because there are certain dangers. Now, the slide before you, that's from D-Drone. The statistics by the end of 2019, I think there were about 100 drone incidences that were captured. There may be more, but those are the ones that I could see. One of the interesting ones, I'll just focus on the first one. In September 17th of 2019, in Washington Township, Pennsylvania, a man was accused of using a drone to drop explosive on his ex-girlfriend's property. Talk about somebody taking split up very, very, very badly, and that is very scary. because as drones develop, that's something that needs to be looked at. We develop the economy and the industry, but we deal with all those other pertinent issues that may crop up because of drone usage. So because of that, the slide before you is the normal CASSOA rulemaking process, where we have the first consideration we have a working group, then a consideration by the technical committee regulatory, presented to the board for distribution to partner states to get stakeholder input. When it comes back, we combine all the stakeholder input. At the second working group, it's taken to the technical committee regulatory that consists of the directors of safety of each one of the partner states of the EAC. And then it's finally presented to the board, the final draft, and sent to the partner states to go through the domestication and promulgation process. That takes between 6 to 8 months average. Now for drones, because there was no guidance, of course, ICAO gave certain recommendations, but because there's no annex or standards or recommended practices or standards, this is what happened at the EAC when we were coming up with the drone draft. And it took about a year, again because of that. However, as was mentioned, I believe it was on the second day, the Republic of Kenya had promulgated the drone regulations, and shortly thereafter, they were withdrawn or revoked. We realized that because of the rulemaking process, whereby the stakeholders consultation comes way at the fourth level, there's a bit of, by the time they get the final draft, if they weren't involved in it because of building synergies, there's a bit of misunderstandings and it tends to bring things back. So we're cognizant of that. Now, before I get into some of the changes, I'll just talk briefly about some of our partner states that have drone regulations. We have 2 that are very active and they've passed the drone regulations, promulgated them. The Republic of Rwanda is one of those states. 1 partner state at the tail end of the promulgation process, 2 partner states at various stages of promulgation, and 1 partner state has no safety regulations. We are currently establishing the critical elements of aviation safety system. However, knowing that no challenge and innovating, that same partner state didn't have any security regulations, but working with our partner, the regional office, ICAO, we were able to, in a record time, pass or give them a whole set of security regulations, and now we are currently strategizing how to sort out the safety issue, because our board, which is very proactive, I have the best board in the world, but it's difficult because they give you everything you need, so you have no reason for failure. DG Rwanda is one of the members of the board, and very, very effective, is what I'll say. So, now, in looking at the RPAS, or drones, what's the next frontier? Sanjeev of Astral was here a few minutes before talking about the Flyox. This aircraft can carry a payload of 1.85 tons, and the maximum operational altitude is 24,000 feet. So for this particular aircraft to help develop our economies, and anybody else, any other businessman who may want to venture into something like this, it's good for us as CASSOA and our CAAs to encourage that development within our partner states. So we are there not to stifle development, but to support it in whatever way we can. So a drone like this that can fly at 24,000 feet, it's really pointless for it to be flying at 400 or 300 feet. Because as we're talking about the possibility of BVLOS, how is it going to transition from one state to the other when it has to be way at the ground level? Because if it goes above 500 feet, Annex 2, Chapter 4 says that VFR has to be above 500 feet. So is it going to operate VFR or IFR? So those are some of the things that we need to look at, but we need to work on creating an enabling environment. So ICAO Doc 10019 talks about encouraging partner states to incorporate drones into controlled airspace. So I'm not going to keep on that too long. So in terms of the next frontier for EAC, yes, Sanjeev, at CASSOA we believe in BVLOS, and our objective is what you see, to have cross-border operation of drones within the EAC. I can only speak for the EAC, but I know it is possible. And with the support from the board and all our development partners, it's something that can be done. Like we're in the process of implementing the upper flight, UFI, upper flight information region, and it's only possible by working together. A lot of things are happening at the EAC, and that only comes by working together. So in terms of drones, I showed you the Flyox, which can fly at 24,000 feet. That is currently where we are in the Republic of Rwanda. You have high and low altitude en route airways. So essentially from 500 feet coming up all the way to about 45,000 feet. So how do you incorporate a drone into that crowded airspace, that controlled airspace? It's a challenge, but at CASSOA, we don't shy away from challenges. So a few matters of concern that have already been raised. ICAO Annex 2, Rules of the Air, you have VFR and IFR. Drones, what will drones operate under as we're looking at the possibility of BVLOS? In terms of the collision avoidance system, how is it going to be looked at? How are drones going to be incorporated into the airspace? When pilots are flying, there's always, from I believe about 30 nautical miles before you get to the airport, you always have warnings from your transponder. There's traffic here, you get a resolution advisory here where you have to pull a bit of an evasive maneuver to avoid that traffic. So for drones, and remember I mentioned at the beginning the airspace is getting congested, so it needs to be done in a very, very safe way. Lost command and control, the C2 link, if it breaks down, what happens? Is the airspace, is the drone operator going to squawk 7600 on the transponder, assuming he has one, for that's lost communication? Or what are they going to do? Emergency 7700, if it's an intermittent break, what are they going to do? So I was very encouraged to see that now we have drone operators here and owners of companies who are really keen on seeing the way forward. Cybersecurity, certification standards, UTM, how is it going to happen? And many, many more. So at CASSOA, right now, we don't have the answers. At least one of our partner states, Rwanda, has really ventured into the drones area, and we can learn a lot from them. But now, what we believe at CASSOA, a way of dealing with the drone issue and finding out a solution. At CASSOA, our mantra is we do not wait for ICAO. ICAO is very, very useful, and we rely on their leadership in the area of aviation. However, at CASSOA, if a challenge arises, we deal with it, we look for a local solution that we can begin utilizing in our own industry, and that way we keep the industry safe, because the industry has a way of moving at a faster pace than ICAO can promulgate annexes and regulations. So, what we want to do at CASSOA is recruit a full-fledged drones expert and an environment expert. We research, develop, and implement cross-border BVLOS ops and ascertain the best implementation mechanism. Do we need to come up with an EAC-US integration plan? And then also, in terms of that, as we research, I showed you that slide on the rulemaking process where we've not been involving the stakeholders. But now, we realize the gap that existed. I have to say, having a supportive board, in the first week of April, we are calling the industry and the regulators and anybody else who's involved to come and help us come up with the first draft of air ambulance regulations. This has not happened before. But with the support of the board, they've approved it. And the idea, despite there not being an annex or standards or recommended practice to that effect, working with the industry, we can come up with a homegrown solution because it's to the benefit of the operators and the regulators to work together for the benefit of the industry. So the same thing for drones. I see my very good friend Craig there, who understands. He's flown, he's a captain on a 737. He gave that up. He has now a drone company. So in terms of the challenges, the regulators and the operators and very many other people will be able to understand and mitigate what needs to be done for safe operation of drones in terms of BVLOS, and then also at the same time, what safety and security mitigation measures have to be put, especially for detection of drones. And now, finally, I add the last one is development of the drone training syllabus. A lot of you may not be aware, in early 2017, ICAO came up with an automatic license validation state letter. By August 2017, CASSOA, the EAC had begun implementing the automatic license validation for our partner states, because we believe in breaking down borders. Why is it that you have to have this different license, that license? So we already have a uniform examination system. We've begun the process of populating that system with ATC questions. And a few months ago, we had already begun talking about drone questions, such that for drone pilots, if they're to be licensed in any of our partner states, we harmonize everything. If anyone sits for an exam, everything is standard. And that way, it'll be easier to break borders, as that is one of the objectives of the EAC. And finally, just to add to what Sanjeev had mentioned, lack of infrastructure. Our heads of states are very, very aware of that particular challenge. So in February 2018, at the 18th summit, the 5th EAC development strategy has infrastructure of aviation in the partner states as a major, major concern. And the current regional integration strategy paper of the African Development Bank, before they weren't funding too many projects in aviation, has now decided to focus on aviation. And one of the reasons is because aviation has been left behind. It's looked at a unique area by some people, but now it's at the forefront. And CASSOA, working together with our partners and anybody else who's involved, will be able to show that even drones cross-border operation at the EAC is possible, and it can be done. In light of that, I have to share this with you. I appreciate that the head of state mentioned it. We'll be having the 5th EAC Aviation Symposium in the Republic of Burundi from the 27th to the 28th of this month. And our theme is evolving with dynamic technological transformation, the case of aviation safety and security. And the idea for that is because of drones and some of those overarching technologies that are coming up, and we need to create an enabling environment for them to succeed. So my last final. At CASSOA, having a very effective and supportive board, DG Rwanda is one of them, having very good cooperations with our partners, ICAO, ISAF, World Bank, and quite a number of people, and having the best team. I have the best colleagues in the world, and yes, I can brag about it because I have the best team in the world. So for us, drones are not a challenge. Working together, we believe in synergies. We are going to sort this issue out. Thank you.
So next, I'd like to ask Francine to give an introduction to her experience and what they're working on, as well as I believe she has a video to show you as well.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you also from my side for this great organization, and to Harrison and his team at the World Economic Forum for putting this panel together. So before to show you the video and to show you some short story, I'm sure that some of you are asking why Switzerland is here. Actually, Switzerland is very similar to Rwanda. So we are a small country, small in size, a little bit bigger than Rwanda in size, but if you don't count the mountain, I think we are pretty much the same, smaller in population, and the most important, we have a long tradition of empowering our people. By empowering our people, I don't mean only the Swiss people, but the people in Switzerland that they are innovative, they are coming with great ideas, and really try to foster those ideas. So Stephen Creamer, in his presentation, he mentioned in the first slide, why do we regulate? And he said, will the proposed regulation bring something, contribute to more safety and security? I will add to that, will the proposed regulation enable and foster innovation? Why I'm saying that? So we really try in Switzerland not to use the excuse of the lack of regulatory framework to hinder innovation. So I have an example. It was back in December 2009. We had one of our research institutes coming to us and saying, we have this project and we would like to fly 15 drones at the same time in BVLOS, so a swarm of drones, in 2009. So we had no clue. How can we allow that? We had no clue. But we didn't say no. We looked at the risk. We looked at what the operation was, at the drone they were using.
We need to hear your lovely voice better.
Better?
Yes.
Okay, is it better?
All right. Okay.
I'm too short. Yes. Thank you, George. So we look at the risk of the operation, and so we used about 4 months, but in April 2010, we were able to give them authorization to fly with their 15 drones at the same time in BVLOS. And after that, we thought, wow, this is kind of cool. So we can do things like with an acceptable level of risk outside like the framework that we currently have. And we thought in the future we will have for sure more and more similar requests from the industry and the research institutes. So we should try to start to work on a guidance. So each time when somebody is coming, we don't have to start again from scratch. So we started to work on the GALO, so the guidance for an authorization in low-level operation, and the GALO was then put later, some years later, into JARUS, and the Joint Authorities for Rulemaking of Unmanned System, and renamed SORA. And of course, the product now is nothing to compare with the GALO, but just to say this was the start of the risk-based approach, performance-based approach that we had in Switzerland. And maybe another example before that I show you the video. We had also a couple of years ago a pilot of helicopter that had the idea to build his own drone. And he said, why are we doing crop spraying with helicopter? That's really not efficient, very noisy, and depending on where you fly, it's very difficult because with the helicopter you have a heavy drifting. And he came to us and said, I would like to do that with my drone. And again, we were like, oh, how do we do that? So we looked in our Aviation Act, but our Aviation Act is meant for helicopter. So if you want to do crop spraying, you need to stay away from river, maybe say 60 meters from river. You have like safety requirements that they are very high and not adapted to drone. So it was very difficult. But the operation itself is not very challenging because you fly maybe 10 meters above the ground. So the risk for the ground and the risk in the air is very, very limited. However, you have other challenge. If you do crop spraying, you put substances on the soil, so you need to speak with the people from environment. You are spraying on food, so you need to speak to the people in charge of food safety. You need to speak in the people also the ministry competent for the protection of worker, because you have worker around, so it could be a challenge. And at the end, FOCA, my office, need to give the authorization. So how can you do that if you don't even have a legal basis? So we thought, okay, we will just like call a meeting and ask all those people from 5 different entities at the Swiss government and ask them if they will agree to try to work together to have a clever way how we can do crop spraying. And we also asked the Agroscope is the Center of Excellence for Agriculture. We also have a lot of agriculture in Switzerland, like in Rwanda, we have 50,000 farms. And we asked them, can you also come and maybe help us how we can then measure the drift of drones compared to the drift with helicopter? So when we had several meetings, so it took 1.5 years. But at the end, we were able with all those entities to agree on a set of requirements. And now if you are doing your operation within that framework, you don't need to go back to the people from environment, food healthy, protection of the worker, and to FOCA. You just need to come to us. You need to make sure that your drone is tested and the drift of your drone is tested. So we know the drone, and you know, okay, we can give you how many meters you have to respect if you have to spray near to a river or a protected area, and then you can fly. And we still have no regulation now, but we have even a standard scenario for crop spraying, and we have 9 companies doing crop spraying in Switzerland. And it's less costly, it's much more efficient. We need 2/3 less substances to spray because we can be very more precise. And and it's an opening new businesses. So enough talk, now I'm going to show you some, So this is one of the examples of the one company doing crop spraying. And as you can see, I mean, the risks are really low. The drone is heavy, it's about 30 kilo, but it's flying very, very near to the ground. And he can be very, very precise. And he can also access places that the helicopter cannot. Here, another company, I will not mention any names, I don't want to do product placement, doing mapping, also here in Switzerland. So this is like, we call it BVLOS, Extended Visual Line of Sight, because we have a visual observer on the way. And this is a drone gathering meteorological data. This is a vertical takeoff, and the drone is going up to 3 kilometers in the clouds. And the last one, it's a bit, sorry, it's a bit loud. The last one is also transport of blood between hospital, also BVLOS, even going through a CTR near to an airport. And all those operations were possible thanks to a performance and risk-based approach, thanks to the SORA, the Specific Operation Risk Assessment. So, and this is now happening in two, this operation in two cities in Switzerland, and many other cities also wants to have those services. But yeah, of course, we need also time to assess the risk, and we work a lot with the local communities to make sure that we have the best route with the less risk. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Francine, thank you so much for showing us those videos and for that insight into your journey in Switzerland. You mentioned a couple of institutions, JARUS and SORA, and so I think that's a great transition to bring up Jörg. So actually, I think we had the order switched. But Jörg, if you can come up and tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll finish with some inspiration from Andrew.
Okay. My name is Jörg Dietrich. I'm a researcher. I work at DLR, that's the German National Research Center for Aeronautics and Space. And I have been a scientific advisor to the Joint Authorities on Rulemaking for Unmanned Systems for the last 3.5 years. And why am I talking about this in the regulation session? Although I'm a scientist, we do science and research on the effects of regulation. So we are really interested in, if you change RPAS regulation or UAS regulation, how does it change UAS design? We're trying to do developments of theoretical aircraft that have not been built yet, just to figure out what the effect of a slight change in a rule is, what a slight change in an assessment or in a means of compliance does. Okay. Very short introduction to JARUS, super short. JARUS is a voluntary cooperation of 60+ aviation authorities worldwide. The biggest authorities in JARUS are the FAA, EASA, and the Chinese CAAC, from what I think I remember correctly. We also have a couple of members from Africa. It has a lot of deliverables that you can all find on the website jarusrpas.org. And I'd like to highlight 2 deliverables, one by Workgroup 2, which is JARUS Ops-B. That is a model UAS regulation for a specific operations category. And the JARUS SORA that was mentioned many times before today. The JARUS SORA is not a regulation, it's not a model regulation, it is a means of compliance for the JARUS Ops-B rule or regulation proposal. So, what do they do? It is important to note that these 2 documents were developed in parallel, which means they were designed to work with each other. The idea of the specific category, or this 3-pillar approach of open, specific, and certified, was originally invented in one of the JARUS meetings, and then the Workgroup 2 and 6 were tasked to develop these 2 documents to make it happen. We have a couple of examples worldwide where these ideas were adopted, that a specific category was implemented. A very prominent example is Europe. The EASA has adopted this, and it will come into effect July 1st this year. So we have a specific UAS regulation. There's a couple of other countries, Australia and New Zealand come to mind, who have a very, very different rule set, but it basically also includes a specific operations category. We've seen our colleagues from ICAO propose their ICAO model UAS regulation, and it too contains a specific operations category. And what do all these approaches have in common? I think it's fantastic that the idea is catching on like this. They all have in common that before you approve an operation or an operator, a UAS operator, you need to do a risk assessment which forms the basis for all further technical, organizational, and training objectives. And the specific is usually always intended for BVLOS operations, And importantly, it has no upper weight limit. Most specific categories do not end at a certain amount of kilograms. They simply have open end. It is capped by the risk eventually becoming too high so that you cannot no longer justify to operate with restriction that you have to move to certified. So what's the need now? When we have regulations all over the world and more that are similar in nature are added, we need a standardized way of performing the risk assessments. Why? Because a common approach across all countries to define and manage the hazards of a drone operation is really key here. And what's the current opportunity? Well, SORA is one possible methodology to use. There are a couple of others that might also be used. But my point is there's methodologies are out there and they're ready to use. And you can now, authorities, operators, you can try to apply these methods and find out how they satisfy your needs. If this works out for you, I have a very good feeling about this, that we're a lot farther than a lot of people think. I think a lot of applications where we're now thinking, how can we do this, are actually already possible with this standardized assessment method. Basics. What is SORA? It's a flowchart process. It can be iterative. It stands for Specific Operation Risk Assessment. It provides a method to basically classify the risk properties of an individual drone concept of operations. And it analyzes the risk to third parties on both the ground and in the air. From this risk assessment, it derives an overall operational risk classifier that in the SORA language is called the SAIL. And driven by the SAIL, it specifies all technical, operational, and training safety objectives. How is it done? Basically, it's a risk assessment system that has multiple lookup tables and flowcharts where you derive both the ground risk, the air risk, and then you combine them to get your overall risk classifier. Now, what's an easy way to describe it? What it effectively does is separating the specific category into 6 subcategories that we call SAIL 1 to SAIL 6. And so you see the open category on the very left and the certified category on the very right. Certified UAS or RPAS operations category means is that all the requirements are the same as in commercial aviation, which means you have AOCs, you have type certificates, you have fully licensed pilots, maintenance organizations, production organizations, design organizations, everything. So it's identical basically. So if you have an RPAS that is in the certified category, you treat it the same way. Open is something where you buy a drone, you get a basic permit, for instance. It depends on the country where you're in, but the amount of requirements for BVLOS flying below 25 kilos are generally very little. And now what's interesting to note is, since SORA is a risk classification process that gives you, depending on your properties of operation, the flight altitudes, airspaces to be used, size of the vehicle, speed of the vehicle, and so on, it gives you a risk class. And then you can see that a SAIL 1 operation and an open operation are very similar in nature. The amount of requirements, of course, in BVLOS flying is higher, but it's similar in nature. It might be the same aircraft. One time open is VLOS, and BVLOS, it will be a SAIL 1 operation. And if you look at the right end of the spectrum, SAIL 6 and certified, they are almost identical. So basically, SAIL 6 is certified operation with slight restrictions. So you cannot do everything, but almost everything. You could be restricted from a particular type of airspace, for instance. And what's really interesting is it covers the whole scope. Of course, for the higher end, for instance, you would need to have type certificates. You need authority-approved aircraft. On the lower end, you do not. In the middle, you need evidence available from the manufacturers, for instance. Same is true for operator certificates and so on. So you basically start with almost no certification requirements to the full thing. In the document, it looks like this. I'm not going to explain the whole tables, just that you know that they exist. Hazards stem from technical issues, from external systems, human error, and adverse operating conditions, for instance. And based on your SAIL level, you can look up what that means for your operation, and that will be mitigated, those risks, by tailored declaration, evidence, or certification requirements, depending on your SAIL level, for airworthiness, operator qualification, and training. And this is being described in an additional document, the Annex Echo of the SORA. Now, what does it do? The SORA provides us the operators and the authorities a common language so that they can talk to each other, and we are less likely to compare apples to oranges. You know, I've seen it so many times that we seem to be talking about the same thing, but we're not, because some of the definitions are slightly different. It standardizes the risk assessment for all specific UAS operations, and it can play a really vital role in simplifying cross-border operations. Give a short example. I think, Steve, you had a similar example in your speech when you have developed an aircraft and an operation and you're training to the requirements of one authority. You want to go to another country. What happens if they have a different risk assessment process, or if they, if they rate risk differently? What do? Do you just start all over again? What do you do as a manufacturer when everyone is doing their own risk assessment method? Imagine a world without SORA, and every operator, by use of SMS, for instance, they do their own hazard analysis. They identify all the risks associated with the operation. They define their own mitigation measures, and then they go shopping for an aircraft. I've identified the risk for my operation. What can I get? What should I get? And on the manufacturer side, so well, every operator wants to have something slightly different. If you can agree on certain classes of risk and certain requirement sets for these risks, then manufacturers can develop for a particular risk level, and they can make sure that their aircraft meet all the specifications and market them better. You can sell an aircraft to many countries, and if the process is similar, how you comply with the rule, then you really open the market. The same is true for operators and so on. I think you get the idea. It's important to note that it also provides interfaces to ATM and UTM airspace management systems. It is written very, very in a very genuine language that it's sometimes hard to read, but it's written this way so that it is easier and more future-proof, that it doesn't matter how you manage the air risk. If you meet the requirements that are laid out by this system, you're fine. SORA does not solve all the problems. It really does not. But what it does do, it has a very, very simple way to analyze your risk class, and then you know what the requirements are. Those requirements might be so high that you cannot achieve to fly in the near future. But in some ways, and in many cases, it's already okay, and we have today technology, you can buy the stuff you need and get compliant. And last but not least, it is for all sizes of aircraft in all airspaces, and it effectively helps bridge the gap between open and certified operations category. And it also defines, as a result of the risk analysis, if an operation is so risky that you better switch to certified category, this system will tell you, get out of specific, you don't belong here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jörg. I don't know if we have any Star Trek fans in the audience, but I like to think of the SORA as a universal translator on risk that lets you talk the same language even if you don't have the same regulations in place. So thank you very much, Jörg, and I'd like to welcome up Andrew for an inspirational talk about what his experience has been in Rwanda.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Mtabaruka. I am Head of Quality and Safety at Rwanda Civil Aviation Authority, and I'm going to share with you the experience of Rwanda with regard to unmanned aircraft systems regulations. So I will have a short introduction, the basis for developing these regulations and the status today, the successes recorded with regard to establishment of these regulations, and some challenges. Of course, challenges will always be there. So to start with, the CAA was to respond to the government policy to embrace emerging technology in addressing socio-economic challenges. So we are here, we are responsible for aviation safety, but policy level, they want to embrace technology. So the CAA has to be there. You're not supposed to be an obstacle to that. You rather have to find a way of ensuring that aviation safety is not compromised and innovation is encouraged. As a CAA, the obligation to ensure aviation safety, we have to ensure that the risk introduced by these emerging technologies is minimized to an acceptable level. By the way, I just want to take you back to my background. I've been an air traffic controller for 14 years, and after that, I entered into safety. So under ICAO Doc 9859, the main aspect in it is risk management. The Director Air Navigation Bureau said that a risk can come from anywhere. You cannot predetermine where a risk will come from. So what is important here is how do you manage the risk? Doesn't matter the technology that is there. What you need is to have a clear way of identifying hazards and managing the risk. So we have been all saying that ICAO has not provided SAPs regarding unmanned aircraft systems, but I want to thank ICAO for whatever they've done to support the growth of this industry, and maybe even other things that will come. They have always been with certain provisions that can help you work on something. The RPAS, the manual on RPAS 10019, the ICAO Advisory Circular 328, Annex 2, Annex 19, which is safety management, and Doc 9859 were the main tools that were to use to ensure that aviation safety is not compromised. I want to tell you this. Being a traditional aviation person, I know that there is a big challenge between trying to integrate two technologies that are somehow different. If these technologies were the same, I believe we don't have any difficulties in integrating them. It is very important to note we are considering drones as aviation, but the experts here will probably help me. These are two technologies that have many, many differences. So integrating them is not that easy. But we cannot sit back and say we are not going to use this technology that the public is interested in, and designers and manufacturers are actually working towards solving public problems. So what do? We want to borrow from all sorts of mechanisms, partnership, research forums to ensure that we come up with a solution to this problem. So in Rwanda, apart from aviation safety, public acceptance is very, very critical. We would not sit here and discuss about regulations, aviation safety, and we think that that is enough. So what Rwanda has done in this, the stakeholder involvement through collaborative decision-making. At a strategic level, we have a steering committee. At technical level, we have a drone technical advisory committee that involves all the stakeholders. This is what has made us manage to move forward, because if you leave out one of the players, you may not be able to achieve the goal. Also, as I said earlier, this is a new technology that not a single CAA was actually ready to do the oversight of this. So again, in Rwanda, we consider the industry very, very important in this. You realize from Part 27 that the responsibility for airworthiness, for operations, does not only lie with the CAA. The industry has a role to play. They have to ensure that, which is part of the SORA process that my colleague has just mentioned. We are a member of JARUS, and we have borrowed so much from the SORA process. So I again want to say something related to aviation safety history. People keep saying that they want to imagine what are the hazards to be presented by drones in the airspace. It is very, very difficult to imagine the hazards that will come until you have seen these drones operating. In safety management, evolution of safety has gone through 4 stages. The first one was technical. When the aircraft was actually starting, most of the accidents were related to technical. But the regulators kept working on reactive processes based on the technical issues identified. Then after that, technical issues were resolved. Now human factors. You can see how that thing is. We are talking about the technology, but people themselves. We have also to look at that. Then later, it was not only people, as technical people involved in the operations, but also organizational issues. And today, we are talking about the total system. Total system, probably that's where we have even the UAS now getting into the airspace, sharing the airspace with conventional aircraft. It is not possible to just sit here and imagine all those things without having operations taking place. So we are thinking that we have a challenge to ensure aviation safety is maintained, but we enable these operations, which I think will enhance our experience towards setting up at least standards based on the experience. So I think I've said almost everything. The basis for us to develop US regulations in Rwanda is actually from the guidance of ICAO. I would just say we are using performance-based regulations, which the Electric Air Navigation Bureau has said, and we are borrowing from SORA process. In JARUS, we have experts from almost everywhere. We have people from the industry, from the manufacturers, we have people from CAAs, and so there's a lot of discussion going on, so we try to ensure that every aspect is considered. So here the guidance says it is possible that states may be able to accommodate unmanned aircraft which are not remotely piloted through use of special provisions or segregated airspace. However, this accommodation is not equivalent to integration. This is a very, very good paragraph that I liked in this. ICAO has given you an open space. First of all, to be sure that safety is not compromised, so performance-based regulation fits into this. That's where we're best to think about performance-based regulation. We didn't stop there. Regulation only will not be enough unless you are able to enforce your regulations. So I also want to say that we had very good support from the leadership, and they have provided a legal framework in order to ensure that regulations are enforceable in Rwanda. Again, from SSP SMS programs, which Rwanda has already started implementing, the UAS is now part of what we have to consider, especially for hazard identification and risk management, in order to ensure that whatever is being done, we don't compromise aviation safety. Of course, we have some challenges related to that. As I said, if these were similar technologies, the inspectors we have in Rwanda would probably be able to handle both manned and unmanned aircraft. But these technologies are different, so we need more resources, basically oversight that needs two expertise. So there's this lack of human resources, especially to do the oversight for unmanned aircraft systems. But of course, this is something that we are working on, to have the necessary expertise to do that. And then the increasing demand of UAS to be used in different purposes, even the ones that we have already operating are continuously seeking to scale up their operations. So this brings more work that, of course, still goes to resources. Globally harmonized regulatory framework, which they said is a process, and we have already started. So we are facing that problem. So we are doing innovative oversight. Training, it was mentioned earlier that we have to have a harmonized training curriculum, or even acceptable training organizations that we can all refer to or even seek to comply with. Thank you very much. That was my presentation.
Thank you, Andrew. So before we do Q&A with the audience, as the moderator, I want to ask one question, because harmonization has come up time and time again. And very briefly, I would go down the line and ask, how do you know that you're harmonizing the best policy? And how can you ensure that the stakeholders that need to be in the room are in the room? So I'll start with Steve, if that's okay.
So the operator, the technician, the pilot, they need to be in the room when you're addressing your risks, and then you have to have the regulatory representative there as well. And that's usually not one person. You've got an airworthiness inspector, a flight ops inspector, in many places an air traffic management inspector, all of whom have to cooperate to get to where the risks are identified and the mitigations are essentially agreed upon as reasonable. I think the SORA outline and tables and methodology, while it is quite comprehensive and gives a good foundation to start, it's going to be incredibly challenging to train people on. And honestly, the regulator's not going to do that work. The work is going to be done by the proponent, because there aren't going to be any more regulators. The regulators we have today are the regulators you're going to have in 10 years. The size of the regulatory community hasn't grown as we've doubled commercial traffic. So that's something to think about. From ICAO, we want to harmonize the methodology, and SORA is one component of that dialogue.
Thank you. And I would remind, we're coming up on time, so.
Okay, thank you, Harrison. I'll just be quick on this one. As everyone saw in my presentation before, we're working in silos, but realizing where the gaps are now, further to what Steve has said, we're bringing the entire industry. When we're dealing with a particular issue, we look at all the stakeholders of that particular industry to come on board So we beat the process thoroughly and ensure that the regulations come out dealing with all the risks that may be in that particular area. And that way, as already happens at EAC, we'll be able to harmonize the regulations and deal with all issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be very short. Just two thoughts. The three-pillar approach that was initially comes from JARUS was adopted by EASA last year, and ICAO is also has also the same approach. So this is already a sign of very good harmonization. And the second, the SORA, I mean, I said that it was, the previous version was born in Switzerland. Currently, it was adopted in Europe, is used in Australia, in Rwanda, in China. India are looking into it. So I think we are on a good way to harmonization. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, as a researcher, I'm a friend of trying new things. What I would do is when we have a methodology like SORA or a similar methodology, let's try it out for new applications where it has not been tried yet. For the given examples where the SORA has been applied successfully, for instance, we already know that kind of works, and a lot of nations are copying, and operators are using the same stuff, so that is already helping. But let's go further and try those things that have not been tried before with this methodology, and then learn from it. And as a next step, help change it, make it even better. And you can do that by joining the work groups where this development is being done. Authorities can send representatives to JARUS Work Group 6, for instance, to help improve the SORA, maybe do a new iteration of it that is even more precise and is more easy to understand. Feel free to.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah. Thank you. I really agree with him for trying to test the technology. And even for trying to harmonize, you need to harmonize knowing exactly what do you want to harmonize. Because data collection is very, very key.
Yeah.
You cannot just imagine a standard and put it there and think that you're sure this will be effective.
Great.
From our experience, we realize that is why maybe the CASSOA knows that at some point we were having draft regulations for the EAC region, where we were part of it, but eventually through experience, we kept modifying our regulations to suit into the operations, and you realize that from data you collect, you keep amending to make sure that there's nothing that goes wrong. So I'm thinking that for harmonization, first of all, and I will seek support from ICAO, we have to find a way of getting experience data, operational data, that will guide how we think about setting standards. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know, Stephen, you had a thought that you wanted to highlight.
Francine and the experience from Rwanda made me realize the epiphany for me is this isn't just aviation safety. You also need that security regulator. You need the environmental regulator. You need the social acceptance with the community and law enforcement, because all of those entities that are outside of the aviation arena have an enormous impact on this industry because of its proximity to the ground. And so it's a much broader effort than just working with the safety regulator.
Thank you so much. I think that's really, really important. We talked about that in the Advanced Drone Operations Toolkit that we developed with many of the partners up here. George, where's George? Do we have time for a question from the audience?
Pardon me?
Do we have time for a question from the audience?
Yes, we have a question. Question from the audience. Okay, we'll start with that one there, and then David, please, you know.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and all protocols observed. My name is Suleiman Nasser Aku, on behalf of the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority and the country. I really like to appreciate all the good efforts and the exceptional efforts that the World Economic Forum, in particular the African Drone Forum, has put in to make sure that we, in particular, the Nigerian representatives, the delegates, were able to make today's very important forum. At least I can remember vividly on my own part. It was a short notice, and I had to miss my flight, and the team, with their efforts, tried to make sure that IC came on the flight to make sure that I'm part of this great forum. Thank you very much, local organizing committee, and thank you very much, the Rwanda government and the DG Rwanda CA, especially, at least making this a great progress and a great success. And we're proud that the recognition you have given to Nigeria, knowing that drone and emerging technology is the future, make sure that we're here. We're really thankful for your efforts. And thank you, everybody, local organizing committee. And apart from that, I have one little question. I really want to get some little clarifications. Now, from the Swiss part, they're talking about writing legislation or maybe drone acts apart from the existing acts that you have. You want to add the drone act. So, well, I try to look at it from this way. If you have an act, an aviation act, if drone is an aircraft, do you really have to map out a drone specifically? You start writing. Do you have specific acts for balloons, helicopters, airplanes? So how do you do it? That's just my clarification. If you still have to expand, or you still have to mention drones specifically because it's an emerging technology. I don't know. I just want some clarification. How do others CA look at that? Do you have to write an act specifically for drones? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess the question is, do you have to expand the definitions, create new definitions for drones, or do they fall under just aircraft because they're defined as aircraft?
Harrison, for the sake of time, let's take 2 more questions, then they can answer it, and then we wind up, please. Yes, sir? The microphone is there. If you can be brief, please.
Oui, je serai bref. Bon, je m'appelle Taïsire, au gars de CARIS. Vraiment, c'est une occasion pour moi pour dire merci à l'autorité de l'aviation civile du Rwanda qui nous a permis de pouvoir organiser cette séance. Encore une fois, dire merci puisque la société CARIS est la première société qui a été certifiée au Rwanda, mais suite à une collaboration entre l'autorité et l'exploitant. Alors pour cela, je voulais dire, on ne peut pas réussir si on n'a pas la collaboration de tout le monde dans ce domaine. Et pour ça, je dis aussi, il faut que les bénéficiaires, notamment les gens qui sont en dehors, souvent nous commettons la faute de dire, mettons ensemble ceux qui sont dans le domaine, et on oublie que à la fin, c'est la population qui va en bénéficier. Et pour ça, moi, je fais une proposition en disant, en plus de tout ce que nous avons fait, c'est la vulgarisation, informer le peuple que les drones, c'est un bien pour eux, au lieu de penser que c'est un danger. Merci.
Merci pour la question. That last question?
Interpreters are really good.
Now you're trying to overtake me, sir. You know, that's okay.
So, Ndenge coming
Brief,
from
please.
the software industry, I'll put
Your
it very
name
briefly.
and then brief.
I'll put it very briefly.
Your name.
My name, Ndenge, coming from Germany. I'm a software developer and consultant, Ndenge. So, because I have to be brief, I want to bring one point in which I find very important. The point is, software has changed the world and has shown that it will be all that has changed the world. And I think there's something that is missing here because somebody said the big players are not there. The experience that that we get, for example, with the smartphone, change disruption and brought disruption in our car industries, bring disruption in planes. I think with the drones, we should be having disruption in the airspace, in aviation in total, because the use cases, the software will be the player when the use cases start developing. How do the regulators take that back to the big players? That was my question.
I think it's a statement. Okay, so you're lucky. It's a question that you can have.
Thank you, Mr. George. Thank you also for the presentators. I'm Mr. Abib Mbaye from Senegal CAA. I have just one question for Stephen from ICAO. I just want to know what ICAO provide for the separation between drones and aircraft. Why this question? Because we know the separation between VFR and VFR. We know the separation between VFR and IFR. We know also the separation between IFR and VFR. But what about between drones and the other aircrafts? Because drones are now a reality in every country. Now we need to know what ICAO prevent about the separation between drones and thank you.
Thank you very much. Good.
All right, I think, does Stephen want to answer that? And then we'll have
Yes.
Francine answer the first question.
Right. If there, pardon me, the audience, please go offline with them later on if you have a question. Yes, go ahead. Let's answer that and wind up.
Okay, thank you. From the ICAO perspective, we don't have a separation standard from drones because we don't even call them drones. We call them unmanned aircraft. And for the small unmanned aircraft today, we simply say they have to stay segregated. There is not a separation standard that has been defined that you can apply between the very small UAS and an aircraft. We treat them like an obstacle currently. But I think that as we move forward, we're going to begin to explore that, and that's going to be part of a risk assessment that's done in an operational airspace first, and then it'll begin to be developed into an international standard. It's one of the items that, as we trial through conversations in the drone enable forums, we will obviously have to be tackling, and that we have been tackling through the UTM and the drone identification work. So I appreciate the question. And I'll move back to that point that was made about airspace and software. I think you're exactly right. But I think that's a much larger conversation than just drones. And we have several initiatives at ICAO that are working on this. The Trust Framework Initiative to develop connectivity that's safe and secure, and then also looking at how we're going to regulate artificial intelligence and other machine learning. So thanks for that.
Thank you. And then Francine, if you want to address the question of definitions.
Yeah, thank you. So currently, actually, we in our national regulation, we are not mentioning drones or unmanned aircraft. We are using model aircraft, so we didn't change the legislation that we had since, I don't know, more than 10 years. We just adapted it, and we thought it's difficult to have a differentiation between model aircraft and drones. And we knew that Europe is going to come anyway with a regulation. We are not an European member state. However, we have a bilateral agreement on air transport, so we have to take over the regulation that Europe is going to do. So we were waiting for that, and starting this summer, we will have the term unmanned aircraft in our regulation as well.
Thank you, and please give a round of applause to all the panelists up here. I wish we had more time to talk, but I think you heard a lot of great information about harmonization, the need for working together, intergovernment connection, and some of the tools that you can use to move forward by engaging the international community. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before you step down, we do the usual.